Public reporting on the 2025 Rosario trial described it as a turf war or mini-mob war between Bonanno and Genovese interests, but the record that surfaced in court was built around gambling rooms, cash flow, extortion threats, and a corrupted detective trying to tilt the board for one side. It shows how the Mafia still fights when the goal is steady money and controlled territory, not newspaper headlines from bodies in the street. The center of the story was not a social club in Old Brooklyn. It was a coffee bar in Lynbrook. Federal prosecutors said that beginning in at least May 2012, the Bonanno and Genovese families jointly operated an illegal gambling parlor inside the Grand Café in Lynbrook, Long Island. That arrangement was not random. On the Genovese side, prosecutors said Carmelo Polito and Joseph "Joe Fish" Macario represented their family. On the Bonanno side, Little Anthony Pipitone represented his. They worked out a profit split so both families could earn from the same room. That is the first important point. This story did not begin with open war. It began with business. Prosecutors said the Genovese side also operated illegal gambling parlors out of Sal's Shoe Repair in Merrick and the Centro Calcio Italiano Club in West Babylon. Salvatore, Sal the Showmaker Rubino, and Joseph, Joe Box Rutigliano collected proceeds and moved money up to higher-ranking Genovese figures, including Polito and Macario. Rubino later admitted in federal court that he ran card games and illegal gambling machines out of his shoe shop for the Genovese family. The whole thing was hidden inside ordinary suburban storefronts that looked harmless from the sidewalk. The Bonanno side had its own rooms and its own structure. Prosecutors said Anthony Pipitone, his brother Vito Pipitone, and associate Agostino Gabriele operated illegal gambling parlors through locations called the Soccer Club in Valley Stream, La Nazionale Soccer Club in Queens, and Glendale Sports Club in Queens. Gabriele was described as one of the men who collected proceeds for the Bonannos and moved money upward to the Pipitone side. So even while the Grand Café was a joint operation, the broader business was divided by family, by room, and by who controlled the take. That arrangement could function for years. It could also turn dangerous very quickly once one side decided it wanted more than its own share. The violence in this story did not begin with a shooting. It began with threats. Polito was later convicted and sentenced not only for his part in the Grand Café operation, but for attempted extortion tied to a separate online sportsbook called PGW Lines. Federal prosecutors said he threatened a debtor with serious violence, first saying the man's face would be broken, and then sending word that he would be put under a bridge. That language tells you what kind of atmosphere sat behind these gambling rooms. They were not harmless backroom card games. They were revenue streams protected by men who were willing to threaten hard violence when money stopped moving. By the time the public got a full look at the feud, the Bonanno side had found an advantage that no ordinary bookmaker could match. Prosecutors said Nassau County Detective Hector Rosario was being paid by the Bonanno family to protect its gambling operations and shut down rival locations. The government said he warned a Bonanno associate that he was under investigation, looked up the home address of a possible witness he believed was cooperating, and accepted money in exchange for helping the Bonanno side. In plain terms, one side in the feud had bought access to a badge. That changed the whole story. It was no longer one criminal group leaning on another. It was a criminal group trying to use law enforcement itself as a weapon. The most vivid part of that corruption story was the fake raid. Trial reporting in 2025 said Rosario helped stage at least one sham police raid on a Genovese gambling location, specifically Sal's Shoe Repair. Prosecutors said the point was to scare the rival side and damage its business. Public reporting from the trial described the raid as so weak and unconvincing that the men inside realized it was not a real bust. That detail fits the whole case. This was not polished power. It was a live mob feud playing out through backrooms, damaged machines, tip-offs, and improvised intimidation. Even when the tactic looked sloppy, the intention behind it was serious. One side wanted the other side squeezed. There was another layer to the Rosario story. According to trial reporting, he also tried to steer authorities toward rival rooms by feeding inside information to law enforcement without honestly explaining where it came from. One report said he gave Nassau prosecutors the password and internal details needed to access the illegal casino hidden inside the Grand Café. The goal was not simply to protect Bonanno gambling rooms from the police. The goal was to help the police hit the other side. That is a more modern mafia fight. The pressure comes through information, access, and selective enforcement, with men in the background trying to bend institutions instead of only pulling triggers. Federal prosecutors finally broke the whole structure open in August 2022, when 2 indictments in Brooklyn charged 9 defendants with racketeering, illegal gambling, money laundering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and related offenses. The named racketeering defendants were Anthony Pipitone, Vito Pipitone, Agostino Gabriella, Carmelo Polito, Joseph Macario, Salvatore Rubino, and Joseph Rutigliano. Rosario was charged separately with obstruction and lying to the FBI. The public list of locations made the story even more specific. Grand Café in Limbrook, Soccer Club in Valley Stream, Sal's Shoe Repair in Merrick, Centro Calcio Italiano Club in West Babylon, and the Queens-based sports and soccer clubs tied to the Bonanno side. By then, the feud had moved from whispers and staged raids into federal court. The first real collapse in court came on the Genovese side. In April 2024, the Justice Department announced that 5 Genovese members and associates had pleaded guilty. Polito pleaded guilty to racketeering involving illegal gambling and attempted extortion. Macario pleaded guilty to racketeering. Rutigliano and Mark Fua pleaded guilty to felony charges tied to the gambling businesses. Rubino pleaded guilty to operating an illegal gambling business for the Genovese family. That matters for the structure of the story. Once the case was public, the Genovese crime family began folding in court one by one. The backroom system that had run for years ended in a series of guilty pleas. Polito's sentencing in December 2024 gave the story a hard closing beat for one of the major players. He got 30 months in prison for racketeering tied to the Grand Café operation and the attempted extortion linked to PGW lines. The Justice Department said he had been surveilled distributing proceeds upward to higher-ranking members. That detail is important. The gambling rooms were not isolated hustles run by local bookmakers keeping everything for themselves. The money moved up the chain. The rooms existed to generate steady cash for larger family structures, and the men inside knew exactly where some of that money had to go. Then came the Rosario trial in 2025, and that is where the feud became a full documentary lane instead of just another gambling indictment. A jury convicted Rosario of making false statements to the FBI about his work for the Bonanno family, though it acquitted him on obstruction. The government's proof at trial, as summarized by the Department of Justice and trial reporting, was that he had lied when agents asked him about the Mafia, about illegal gambling spots, and about the Bonanno associate he had warned. The verdict did not validate every accusation the government made against him, but it did lock in the central disgrace. A Nassau detective had lied to cover up his mob work in the middle of a Long Island gambling feud. The names are what make the story stick. Little Anthony Pipitone on the Bonanno side, his brother Vito, Agostino Gabriella moving money, Carmelo Polito and Joe Fish Macario on the Genovese side, Joe Box Rutigliano and Sal the Shoemaker Rubino handling rooms and proceeds, Mark Fua in the online betting lane, Damiano Zumo later appearing as a cooperating witness, Hector Rosario standing in the middle of it with a badge and a lie. None of them gave this story the broad celebrity of a Gotti-era case. That is exactly why it works. It feels current, local, and real. It shows how the Mafia survives by shrinking into storefronts, club rooms, and side businesses, while still using the same old tools: tribute, threats, discipline, and corruption. The cleanest way to understand the Long Island Bonanno Genovese casino feud is this. It was a mob fight built for the 21st century. No broad daylight war for the front page. No endless parade of funerals. The pressure came through gambling parlors hidden in ordinary businesses, through profit splits that created resentment, through extortion threats when bettors fell behind, and through a detective who tried to turn his office into a weapon for one side. When the case finally surfaced in court, the old Mafia pattern was still there in full. Make money quietly, kick it up, lean on debtors, hit rivals where they earn, use fear when cash alone is not enough. On Long Island, that pattern stayed alive far longer than most people around those storefronts probably understood.